Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the Faith Roots podcast, and we're joined today by Sue Butler from Welcome Churches, and we're going to talk a bit this afternoon about refugees, about asylum seekers. We're going to be talking particularly, but not exclusively, in the context of what has been happening with the situation in Ukraine. But first of all, Sue, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself and about Welcome Churches?
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me today, Dave. It's a pleasure to join you. So I'll start with Welcome Churches, actually. And so Welcome Churches is a national charity. We grew out of a local work in Derby. We became a charity in 2018. So Welcome Churches was founded by two ladies, Karina Martin and Emily Holden. And I joined them at the point at which we became a national charity, which was late 2018. We have grown hugely since then, especially over this last year. So our vision is really to see every refugee here in the UK welcomed by a local church. Counting up the number of local churches there are, if every local church welcomed 3 refugees or people seeking asylum, then we would have that covered. So we want no refugee to be alone, and we think that the local church is just so well placed to do that, and it's in our DNA. It's our biblical mandate to welcome the stranger and welcome people arriving here from other places. And we basically come alongside local churches. So a big part of our work is in training and equipping churches to give that welcome. So some churches are already doing it really well, which is fantastic. And other churches, kind of the other end of the scale, are saying, we would really like to join in and we just don't know where to start, not sure what to do. And yes. So we want to equip, churches at all different stages to feel confident, to be aware of trauma, to be aware of culture, to think about good practice, to think about where does our faith fit in and how does that all work when we're welcoming people from other backgrounds. So we have lots of different types of training and equipping and resources that churches can access in order for them to give that welcome. And then we also have a UK-wide network. We call it our Welcome Network. We were just looking back recently, and the beginning of 2021, we had 80 churches in our networks. We were really thrilled. We had 80 churches across the UK that were really committed to welcoming refugees and asylum seekers. That was January 2021. Mm-hmm. This month, we have 911.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it has taken. So I heard about Welcome Churches probably around about 2020. Still very sort of small then, but I think a couple of big things have really sort of drawn attention to the work, haven't they, over the past few years?
Yeah. Certainly the influx of Hong Kongers and our call to the church to welcome those coming from Hong Kong, not technically refugees or seeking asylum, but seeking safety and seeking a future here in the UK. And I think that was a very understandable ask to the UK church, and a lot of churches stepped up, said we would love to do that. Yeah, and I think as they did that, they're saying that was amazing. We've welcomed 3 families or 50 families, or some churches have had 300 new people in their churches from people coming from Hong Kong. And churches said, wow, we've got a youth group again, or whoa, we've got a Sunday school again. And it's just been great for churches. And 80-something% of them said, that's been great. We also want to welcome anyone else coming to the UK, because we didn't know we could do it, and it's just been so great. So that was the start of our big growth, I think, and from there churches have gone on to welcome other nationalities and wanting to join in with that.
Yeah, because it's probably worth saying at this stage, and there are just so many different ways. I guess one of the challenges is that sort of expectation or the assumption of who refugees were and where they came from, and there would have been perceptions previously. I guess there's a risk the other way, isn't there, that in some respects a family coming from Hong Kong, already Christians, already having a lot of sort of resources with them, will feel very different to when you've got families in your community that are not believers that actually don't have any interest or perceived reason to show an interest in church, but also have very high levels of need. Would those be sorts of areas where you would sort of help churches with as well, in terms of what it means to?
Yeah, for a lot of churches, it's just growing in that kingdom life that we welcome people. And yeah, some churches might find some nationalities easier to welcome, but we're all different. Some people are easier to welcome than others,
yes,
no matter what their nationality.
Yeah.
Some people are struggling a lot, some people not so much. So really, I think we've grown as churches in our understanding, and in our just finding that joy in joining in with that part of God's kingdom that includes welcoming those, whether or not we think they're similar to us or more different from us. We gain a lot and we grow a lot as we do that. And I mean, our passion is just to equip churches and help them and encourage them in that, and come alongside them, so that it is a step forward from a church, but it's practical to have good practice training, and to be a bit more informed about trauma and how that spills out, and what it looks like, and what we can do as like non-professionals, just people in the church. How does what we do affect people, and how can we be helpful to people who have come out of really traumatic situations?
So just sticking with that for a moment, I'm just thinking back to our experience with a church where we saw a number of refugee families coming through, and I think a couple of experiences that we had as a church family was, first of all, the just being hit with the level of trauma that people had experienced, and seeking to walk with people when they very clearly were not being believed by others in the process. So and seeing someone who you could see yourself, you wouldn't claim to be experts in, not claiming to be lawyers or judges, but as pastors and people, you tend to pick up when stories are real. And I think some of the challenges then were, first of all, unlike the sort of the situation with Hong Kong, or even a little bit with with the big sort of recent things with sort of Afghanistan, and then with Ukraine, that people were not arriving with this sort of any sense of this is prepared for, or that they are wanted here. So actually having people in our midst where the system was trying to get them out of the country, and I think the first thing was not knowing, who to go to get people the right help that they needed, the right legal help. So it becomes trial by error. And then the other thing was, how do you respond to trauma, kind of that sort of third-hand, sort of vicarious sort of experience of trauma. So I would say a number of people in our church family almost felt like they had been through the trauma themselves. There was a level of, not the same as the person, but there was a level of kind of reflected PTSD. Would those be sorts of things that you would be covered in that kind of?
We do address those things, because they're the last bit of what you were saying about what we experience when we walk alongside people. I mean, obviously we can't affect the asylum process, and that in itself can be really traumatizing and really, really very difficult for people who have managed to get themselves here and are seeking safety, and that often compounds what they've already been gone through. And it's when there's an expectation of having arrived, and then the whole asylum system kicks in, it can be extremely difficult, very socially isolating. That brings its own huge challenges. So in terms of Welcome Churches training, we have training for churches in our network, and just these two areas that you mentioned, actually. So one of them is trauma awareness. So for us, just normal people in the church, just for us to know, okay, what's a bit of background about trauma, like what causes trauma, what kinds of trauma are there, and what the words to describe it, kind of thing. And then also looking at how does that spill out in someone's life. what might it look like? Sometimes it's obvious, it looks obvious if it's tearfulness or depression. Sometimes it can be disorganization, or just not getting themselves to places on time, just because the compound effects of all this stress in their lives. So we do talk about that in our training. And then we talk about what is helpful for us to do. Helpful, not harmful. So
yes.
you'll have to join the network and sign in to hear the whole training. But some of the things are just being, the person we are. So for us, if I'm phoning migrant help with someone and I'm getting really ratty because they're on the phone and they haven't picked up the phone for like 40 minutes.
Yep.
If I start getting ratty, I raise that stress level for the person I'm helping.
Yeah.
So I need to find it in me to be calm, to say, oh, they're always like this. Tell you what, let's pop the phone here and have a slurp of tea and we'll just grab it when they answer, or this kind of thing. So the way that I am can really help people. And we talk about that in our training. And then we also talk a bit about, when should you refer someone? And, a lot of well, I wouldn't say a lot, many nationalities where people are seeking safety here don't have perhaps mental health care and those things as normal everyday things. And I think we were only just getting there really in Britain. I didn't grow up thinking about my mental health, and it's something I've learned much later on in life. So an understanding of that is also helpful, that you don't have to ship someone off and get them fixed. A lot of it is walking alongside people. It's being consistent. It's just, welcoming them in a really good way. So that's one side of the training. And then the other side, which you mentioned, is the effect on us. And some of that depends on who we are as a person and how we cope with hearing people's stories and how we process that. So hearing the same story, two people might have different reactions. One might be fine with coping with it, and the other person just might be really, really upsetting, and you end up dreaming about it, or what chronic worrying for the person. So we have training in our network talking about looking after myself as I'm supporting and working with refugees, and that does deal with things like compassion fatigue, just feeling worn out by helping someone whose challenges are not easily fixed. It's going on a long time. And things like vicarious trauma, as you mentioned, where you feel traumatized by hearing about someone else or watching their life. And so that's really important, that we look after ourselves, and that our churches are aware. If you have people in your church who are working alongside refugees and supporting them, that church leadership and pastoral staff are aware of that and can care for you as well and check in with you. And if you have a team of people at your church, that you can check in and pray with each other and have a confidential place where you can say, do you know, I heard this story, it's really difficult. Can you just chat with me and maybe we could pray together? So that kind of thing is really useful for us, because we don't want to get burnt out. We want to continue doing what we feel God has called us to do.
Yeah. What about the other side as well? Because I think we can talk about the challenges and the pain, but you've already sort of intimated about this with Hong Kong, because there is also so much potential blessing and so many, and my experience is how much I've learned from, not how much I've given, but actually how much I've received from refugees here and their testimonies. So what's your kind of experience with that, and how do we listen and learn well? Without giving all of your training material away, obviously.
Exactly. I think having people come into the church from other countries and from other backgrounds generally enriches us as people. We have our own culture, and British churches have their own culture, and it's not always biblical. Sometimes it's British, and people come in, and
sometimes it's not even that, it's just
there is there is that too. But let's say hospitality. The way we do that as British churches is a certain way. The way that other people do it may look very different, and I found personally myself, I've learned huge amounts about biblical hospitality from non-European people who just do hospitality so much better, and their whole view of including people, welcoming them. We're just about to eat a meal. I insist you sit down with me, please eat together. Or, do you know, I'm just going to go and cook something. I'm going to make you welcome. And I've been on the receiving end of that, and I have learned so much. And our family culture has changed because of the people that we have met. And so it's a pleasure. And it just really, it makes us think a lot about kingdom values, to say, what is just really cultural, and what areas can I grow in where other cultures represent that better, and I can grow in that way. That's kind of one aspect of it. I mean, the other aspect is people coming to Christ and coming into the church community, again, just so enriches. We start looking more like God's kingdom when we embrace different cultures and genuinely don't keep them as our refugee project. Oh, these are the refugees that we help, kind of thing. But really making room for people to fully become part of the church, to take leadership, to serve, to be a normal brother or sister in Christ in the church. They will be helped and enriched in their journey, and we will be very enriched in our churches. And that's just a great thing, I think, that's happening in the UK church at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, two things that stick with me are, first of all, one family, and with all the time that they had because they couldn't work, so they opened their home office accommodation, opened it up, were teaching other refugees English. They were doing Bible studies in their native language, and ended up planting a church whilst they were there. So we sometimes joked about this being a Home Office funded church plant, but not your usual source of funding. I'm not the best of funders, if people think about that kind of route.
That's great.
Yeah, and the other there's a song, the Goodness of God. It's one of the Bethel songs, and whenever we sing that, I always hear one person singing it, because they had such a story of trauma, of horrendous abuse against them, and it has always stuck with me that I hear that person singing that song loudest in the church, thinking, you're the person I least expect to be able to talk about God's goodness, and yet you're able to talk and sing about it. And that really just challenges me every time that we preach and we talk about suffering and persecution, and I think so often we talk about these things as this sort of hypothetical or sort of very spiritualized. We get a Bible passage that talks about suffering, and we say, of course, none of us really do suffer or face persecution, but you might get a bit of joking or teasing, or it might be hard at work, and then someone turns up and it's no, actually it has been real physical. So that awareness of people's trust in God and the wider family of God, that our experience of God and life is actually unusual in a lot of respects, isn't it? We are the kind of the odd ones out.
And I think having people, as you say, we've heard about people, or we've sent missionaries, or we've heard these stories, but then to have people become part of our communities who've actually lived that is hugely challenging if we're moaning about the seats, or don't like this or don't like that. And then you meet someone who has really suffered and at huge cost has chosen to follow Christ. I think it's very humbling for us, and it just, again, it does help us grow, and we just have to really think through our own decisions and how we do church and what we think about church. And to have people that we consider the heroes of our faith amongst us is a big challenge to us, really huge challenge to the UK church, and has been really good for us, I think.
It has, So we can talk a bit about Ukraine, and I think that's an area where I think, actually, a few weeks back, right at the start, as the invasion was starting, I was able to talk to Ryan Burton King, who's pastor in London and has family from Ukraine. His sister-in-law has managed to get out. His father-in-law is is still there in the west of the country as a pastor there, and that has been an area, just hearing about the response of our brothers and sisters to what has been happening has been incredibly moving and challenging. Here we are a few weeks later, and I get, it's still in the headlines, but I've noticed it's starting to drop a bit off of the main headlines now. People are starting to worry a bit more about what the Chancellor of the Exchequer's wife's tax arrangements are, and those kinds of things. And we hear about Russian troops pulling back and peace talks, and I guess there may be a bit of a feeling of, does that mean the crisis has gone away? Do we not need to worry about that now? So could you, just give us an update on what is the situation, and particularly in terms of how it's affecting the refugee situation and people potentially coming here?
I think it's difficult to ride the waves of the media, and I think for a lot of people they've probably been a bit exhausted with all the news from Ukraine, so it might be a bit of a welcome break to not be listening to it every day, especially those that have signed up and are really geared up, watching the news and waiting to host a family. But you're right, it has slipped a little bit off the headlines recently. Lots of things going on. I'm sure everyone listening is also up to date, but there's a big backlog of people. There have been, the people that have signed up to host, not many of them have received people yet. I think might be around 1,000 have come so far across the whole of the UK, which is a trickle of the of how many people might come. There might be many more than that coming, and I think there's also been a lot of uncertainty. I think a lot of people signed up in the beginning and genuinely want to host, and then it's a bit of a waiting game, which isn't easy. I think it's going to require a lot of patience on the part of those that want to host. I think they perhaps might realize it is quite a complex decision to move countries and to move a long way away from your country and into an unknown situation and all of that. And I think probably people that have signed up, it's now a phase of, you really want the person to come, but also you're hearing bits and pieces. Is Russia going to stay over to the east? Are people going to go back, or is that not going to happen? So there's a lot of uncertainty, I think, even with people who have found someone to match with, and now it's not quite so sure, or they maybe had to move on and find someone else to match with. So I think it's quite a challenging time for those that want to receive people. And I think it's very challenging also for Ukrainians to know what to do.
I guess that's part of it, is it's the patience of being aware that this is huge, it's complex for people's lives, and those things can't be rushed for. And it's not about us. It's not about that we want to have someone, and many of us do, and we've signed up with all our hearts. We want to join in, we want to host someone, but it's actually about what's the right decision for each family, and that's a huge decision. I mean, in terms of refugees globally, over 85% choose to stay in neighbouring countries normally. Because of the possibility of going back, because they've left family there, and so it's not to move too far away from family or from your home that you've left there with all your stuff in it. So it's a very complex decision, and not quite as straightforward as perhaps a lot of people thought when we first signed up. Oh, we'll have someone in 2 weeks, we'll be able to host them and care for them. It's more complicated and more drawn out than we thought. Is it still worth people? Is there still a need for people to be ready to sign up, or is that phase over?
I mean, I think there are people who've signed up that perhaps have now thought it through and realized that they can't sign up. So I think if you thought it through and you definitely want to, go ahead and sign up. Most definitely. You can do that. There's also a need within our church community. We've been talking about the needs of supporting that person who's going to be hosting. So I think there's plenty of support that's going to be needed, and some people will have people live with them in their home, and that's what they will decide to do, and they will go through the whole process, and eventually they will host someone in their home. But around that family, a lot of support will be needed. That the guests coming won't want to just sit in the house every day for the next 6 months. They'll need to get out of the house. They'll need to meet people. They'll need to be able to choose friends and have people that I think, oh, I really like this person. I want to spend more time with them. We really click as a family. And so for us as church communities, we need to gather around those that are hosting and say, okay, what can I do? And some people, it might be, you know, I can introduce them into the local leisure facilities, or I'm a member of the leisure centre, I swim, I do this and that, the other. If the family's interested, I'll be the one to do that for them. Other people might say, do you know, I'm not sure what I can do, but I'm willing to give money. You know, for instance, if the family needs a bus pass or needs to pay for something in order for their children to join in with different things, maybe I'm willing to hear about those needs when the family comes and join in that way. And there might be others that help with shopping, or others that help with getting someone to a youth group. I mean, there's loads and loads of things that when you know who the family is, that family is hosting would really like a break, I'm sure, on different nights, and they don't want to be the ones also driving them everywhere or walking everywhere with them and showing them everything. So I think there's loads of room. As with any family or person coming seeking safety here, there's room for lots of us to join in and to give them choice. We have choice who our friends are. We have choice who we say, oh, can we grab a coffee? We don't have that arranged for us, and it's helpful in the beginning to have it arranged, but you want a choice, and you want to be normal again and feel that you have a bit of control over your life, and you can choose friends and move forward that way. So that'll be important, that we all gather around and be a community, both around the guests coming and also around the hosts. Maybe we need to invite the hosts for a meal sometime, and they can just come and have a meal at our house and just chill and relax, and
leave the guests to enjoy the house as well, because that's the other thing is, if any of us have like stayed even just for a short time in somebody else's house, it's quite weird, isn't it, to be in their house and then actually to say, no, this is free, it is completely your space, and you can relax now, because that's hard to do. And that kind of thing is that something that, so Welcome Churches or any of the other sort of organisations, the sites, the sanctuary site, the Krishkandaya, is that about linking in there and saying this is what I can offer, or is that something that you'd say is best done through your local church? So is that about getting churches aware of how are we going to do this, or is it sort of logging in and saying, hey, I can give this amount of money through you, or I've got time to do this, could you link me up with a host family?
Yeah, so I think that a lot of this kind of wraparound support is going to be done locally. And so church, so like today at lunchtime, we had a time where people could just come and chat for an hour with the Welcome Churches team about things they've been thinking or questions they had. And one man was sharing about how they as churches have come together because they've realized, okay, there's 3 people in that church and a couple in that church, all in the same location. So they've come together and said, okay, we're the hosting families between the churches. Let's pool our resources and work together, so every church doesn't need to find someone who can do all these different, perhaps more specialist things, like knowing about schools registrations, or having someone who can help sign up with the GP or with at the nursery, or different things. So they're deciding to pool their resources, and I think that's a really good idea.
Good, because there's things we can't do on our own, but actually there's more you can do. That spread of resources, and just thinking, our church meet in a school, we don't have our own in the week building, so but then there are other churches that wouldn't have the same kind of people resource on the ground to be there to welcome, but would have a building where people could go and meet and do stuff and get support. So that's kind of
we've also, as a church, we've also joined in with the community group. So there's also a community group here for hosting Ukrainians, and so we've amalgamated the 2 groups, which is great, just because of sharing resources and making sure we're being fair to everyone and offering the same kind of support, that it's not just dependent on who's hosting you. but that it's just as a community welcoming people and just talking about what kinds of support is appropriate. I think it's been great for the church. It's good for churches to get involved in their community and to be more visible. And we've been able to say, yeah, over 70% of Ukrainians have some kind of church links or go to church or a Christian background or practicing Christians. So the church is going to be a focal point for them. Whether they'll choose to come to ours or go to another one, that's their own choice. And we need to make sure we're listening to what they want and what kind of church they want to go to. But we've been able to, in the community, to say, look, we have a lovely cafe and we have lovely facilities. We'd be happy to host if you want people filling in forms or a place to come each week for the first few months where we can facilitate people in the community, helping them. And also for us, we're, well, I am Welcome Churches, but our local church is also, my local church is also part of the Welcome Churches network. And so we're able to access other resources such as Bibles in Ukrainian. We have a partnership with the Bible Society for churches in our network, and we can get Bibles in Ukrainian or Russian. We can also get a really nice trauma first aid type brochure called Beyond Disaster, which is in Ukrainian and Russian. I think it's going to be available in English as well, but that just helping people when they first come, just saying, this is how you might be feeling, just a really gentle look at something helpful to give to people. So we have a lot to give as the church, but it's really good that the community sees us, and it's an opportunity for us to be more visible, like in the wider community here as well.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about sort of specific sort of types of people that might come. I guess one question people might have is obviously in a conflict, being aware that there has been loss of life, meaning basically loss of parents. What's the situation in terms of unaccompanied sort of minors coming? Will some of them be coming through? I think there have been some that have arrived in the UK, and you know what happens in that kind of situation. Are there ways that churches and Christians can be involved in sort of responding to that?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of information on that, but I think they're coming via a slightly different route, because they will come under social services if they're unaccompanied minors. And so I don't think that through the Homes for Ukraine scheme you're going to get minors without an adult in your household. And there may be ways for churches to join in, but probably chatting with the council and social services might, if a church is already offering support in that way in the community, it might be that they meet Ukrainians who are also under social services and being cared for in that way.
I guess probably Home for Good will probably have some information on that side as well. Hopefully.
Yeah, possibly.
So we've kind of touched on that challenge of, you know, when things move out of the sort of the headlines, and the challenge of sort of fatigue around sort of responding to news. You know, obviously we had the big thing around Hong Kong. Then, you know, it feels like an age away, but it's not actually that long since the evacuation out of Afghanistan and the response there. Where are we in terms of the need and responding to Afghanistan and the refugees coming from there?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's pretty much dropped out the news altogether. As you probably know, they were evacuated at great speed and housed in hotels all across the UK, quite often without the local authorities knowing. The Home Office just made the arrangements and had to get them in. They had quarantine hotels, and then they went into these, what they're calling bridging hotels, which are meant to be short-term stays in hotels before they got housed by the local councils. So that was the scheme. Unfortunately, around 10,000 are still in hotels around the UK. So huge numbers of people. So in terms of Welcome Churches, it was quite a unique situation in that we were asked by Home Office and also by local authorities to become involved, because so many people came so quickly. There aren't refugee organisations in all the places where they were landing, in all the hotels across the country. And so churches were in quite a few locations, literally the first ones through the door, in helping them. Actually, we totted up last week how many hotels Welcome Churches are still involved in. And we are still involved in 41 hotels around the UK. And some of them have 100, 200, 300 people housed in them.
Yeah.
And so hugely stressful for the families that are just stuck there living in a hotel with their children. Not safe places for children. Not good places. They're meant to be for a weekend break or a week's holiday or something. They're not meant to be accommodation. The churches have been doing amazing work, I would say, and the work of the church has really grown as other organisations had said, well, our emergency response is over now, and often it's been the church is left there working alongside others, perhaps from the council or from other organisations, but they've had a really big part to play. Some of them are involved in things you would expect, like English classes. Some of them are involved in things like sewing classes and arranging sport and cafe day, where they all get outside the hotel and meet in a church cafe somewhere, and there's care and activities for children. Of course, most of the children, perhaps even all, are now in school, but just that whole care for them as families. Recently I heard about a church nearby, and they're doing Life in the UK courses now, and just really helping prepare them well for eventually. They're all waiting for councils to step up and say, yes, we can house you, and to be able to be matched. Smaller families got given housing earlier on because they were easier to house. Families with larger numbers of children, it's much more difficult. And so unfortunately they're stuck in that situation. I mean, it's not in the news. I would say the church in the UK is doing a great job still, and just beavering away as the church does, somewhat under the national radar, but very much seen by the local councils and local support, and it's really raised the profile of churches. And we trained, I think, over 500 people from churches in like good practice and working with the local authority, and I think that's hopefully been really helpful, and churches are just doing a good job, really good job.
That's encouraging to hear, but as well sort of raises that challenge back of there's that big thing of responding, of welcoming ourselves, but then that whole bigger challenge of is that enough for us? Is that the church meeting its obligation, if you like, to welcome when people come, or is there more that we can be doing, that we should be doing? So just thinking through, I know people were quite concerned about the level and the speed of the response of the UK government and the willingness to Ukraine, but obviously sort of longer term going back. I remember my local MP, after we'd taken someone to see him, and then he said to me he'd in a previous government he'd worked in government, so not just as a backbench MP, and he said to me, he just said, I get really frustrated because you can have a cruel system or that is efficient, or a system that is not efficient but is merciful and compassionate, and he said, I find this system to be managing to be neither compassionate nor efficient. That whole sort of thing about the hostile environment, and then in terms of certainly the impression that we get is that recent legislation and efforts have been actually to make it harder for somebody to find refuge here. Should we? Is that just something we have to accept? Do we need to stay out of that and say that's politics, that's not our business, or should we be saying doing more, and if so, what?
Yeah, absolutely. We should be saying and doing more. I think there's it's part of our calling to be at the front and to challenge social injustice. I think we find that again in our biblical mandate. We see Jesus doing it, we see in the Old Testament, and I think, yes, some of us just feel like we're there for the practical help, we're there to help the person in front of us, and others of us can join in at a much higher level, at political levels. And then there's a space in the middle that we can all also join in with. There are things that we can do. I mean, I think with the Borders Bill, fortunately, it depends on who you follow on Facebook and your social media, but there has been some good information to keep us up to date. Yeah. And as you say, it has the potential to criminalise people seeking asylum in the UK. The Geneva Convention actually says that people may have to come via unconventional routes in order to seek asylum, and that's not something that's often mentioned by those that are for this bill and pushing this bill through. But it's important that we know that, I think, as Christians, that this is actually acknowledged in the Geneva Convention.
Yeah, I think that is huge, because I think so often when you talk, even that sort of description of people being illegal immigrants, when in fact they are not illegal. It is not criminal to turn up somewhere and to ask for asylum. That is
exactly
illegal. That is the legal route, the only way to do it, in fact.
Yes, I mean, apart from if you get on a type of resettlement scheme,
yes,
in which case there is a safer route that way. But though the nationalities on those resettlement schemes are very narrow, and there aren't the numbers to cope with the number of people that need to seek safety. So if you're on a resettlement scheme, that's a really good way to come. But for everyone else, as you say, the people get mislabeled as illegal, when actually, so long as when they arrive, they report themselves to an official and say, I've come to seek asylum, they register, and then they're in the asylum system, and they are entitled to accommodation and a very small amount of subsistence money. That's a whole nother topic.
It is, yes, it
but
is,
I think as Christians, I think it's really good. I think some of the things we can do, again, kind of just as normal people, if you like, just your average Christian, I'd say, certainly staying informed is really good. If God is really putting this area of injustice on your heart, I would say follow it. Find out who reports good news. Look at Refugee Council, look at other organizations that put out statistics and put out news. So not just watching the media, actually looking at organizations that put out good information that you can learn from is really good. So stay informed and make sure you're not just learning from the BBC or other news stations. It's a really good place to start. And then you start understanding some of the issues a little bit more, and you start to read beyond the headlines to understand the topics a bit more. And it's not that complicated in a way that most of us could really take that on board and understand more. Obviously, praying for God's justice, knowing what our values are as kingdom people and what God's values are, is a really good place to start and pray. Sometimes I find with really big topics, I sometimes go to the Psalms and other places where, or laments, where the psalmist is saying, why this injustice? Why is this happening? When will you intervene? Why, God? And then there's a trust in him, and yet I will put my trust in you, and yet you are the bringer of justice. And I think some of those models can be good for us. Recently, as a team at Welcome Churches, we wrote laments for the Ukraine, and we use that model, and it was very helpful to write out a prayer and be thoughtful, and then we used that prayer and prayed it. And so there's a place for just unburdening our heart and praying, and there's also a place for using set prayers or using a psalm or lament in terms of praying. So just be creative and use your own traditions of prayer as well, as to how you'd pray. In terms of other things that we can do, writing to your MP is something we've been encouraged to do on lots of different topics, and hopefully we've all got that idea and have maybe done it at least once before. But you can write to your MP and you can ask for an appointment with them as well, and you can request that they vote for better legislation, for more safe routes. And there's lots of model letters that you can use. Again, I just had a quick look before we recorded this, and the Refugee Council has a letter that you can use. So if you haven't done it before, you're like, no idea how to write that letter, there's lots of standard letters that you can either use as they are, or you can just use them and change them a bit and make them more your own. So that's something, I think each letter that an MP gets is representative of many people in the constituency. So I think that's a good thing for us to do, and an easy way of joining in. We can also join campaigns as well. There's often campaigns that are asking for signatures, and organisations are going to take that forward. So there's lots of different kinds of ways that we can join in, and it might be something practical as well, locally, something that we can petition for or ask for. Locally here, we asked for some sponsored places for higher education for asylum seekers that couldn't access it, and they had families whose children had done really well up to A level and then could not access further education. So we did some advocacy for them, and now 2 places have opened up locally. So all sorts of things, depending on what your speciality is or your background. Lots of ways in which we can say, yeah, we really want to see God's justice. We really want to see a more just system. We want people's rights to be upheld. We want people to be able to come here and seek safety. So lots of different ways, depending on what you would like to join in with, or where your heart is on that.
Well, that's good. Yeah, obviously, one thing we'll keep encouraging people to do is to get in touch with Welcome Churches to get their church as a partner church. So
I was just about to say that to end. I was going to say, love if you have a heart to welcome refugees, if your church is just starting out saying we want to join in somehow, or we have one family that's going to host Ukrainians, how can we learn a bit more and prepare for that? Or if you're experienced, and you really should be there so that people can find you and other churches can find you. If I have a friend from here who's moving to another city and I didn't know someone there, I can use our map and find a church that's already said they will welcome a refugee, and I can refer my friend through to that church, knowing that they're committed and they will get that referral and they will go out and welcome them. So do sign up to the network. We also have training that's on our welcomechurches.org/events page. There's a little pause for Easter, but there is a Ukraine welcomer training on the 20th of April, and there will be more dates added to that shortly. Yeah,
I will get some links up when we share this on Faith Roots, so people will be able to click. And I guess are you going to be around in person at some of the, I know there's Word Alive and Spring Harvest and things like that coming up. Is some of your team going to be around at some of those sorts of events? If
we are not at Spring Harvest, but you can always find us.
All right, yes.
If you make contact with us through welcomechurches.org,
and that's
we are scattered around the country, and we are available for local things or for church things, either on Zoom or sometimes in person. So we have this little piece of information. So last week we were looking at the team, and we amongst the team, we're about 13-14 people. I've lost count. We speak 11 languages, and we have over 50 years of overseas cross-cultural experience. And we are scattered throughout Britain. So there's lots of resource on the team. So we'd love to chat and support churches all across the UK, wherever they're at on their journey.
Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And I would encourage people to follow up with that. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for having me, Dave. Enjoyed talking to you.
Likewise.